This is a recorded webcast on Free Palestine 101 for tech workers. We have a guest speaker who will spend about 15 to 20 minutes giving a lecture on the subject matter. There will be time for questions and answers, and there also may be time at the very end for folks who want to stay on for a deeper discussion. So we're planning on recording this session for about 30 minutes. We ask that if you have questions at any time, that you put them in the questions and answers part of Zoom. If you have any technical issues, just make sure to flag that and we can assist you. And I think those are all the housekeeping issues. So with that, I want to welcome you. My name is Mallory Nodal. I'm a volunteer with the Stop the Wall campaign, have been so for many years, and it is my pleasure to welcome Matt Mahmoudi, who is an expert researcher and will give his own introduction when he begins speaking. But very briefly, I wanted to intro Stop the Wall a little bit and why we're having this discussion now. I'm sure you're all aware that this time is of particular importance. However, Stop the Wall has been working against the construction of the apartheid wall between Israel and the West Bank since 2002. The Palestinian Grassroots Anti-Apartheid Wall Campaign is the name, actually, of the organization. Stop the Wall, for short, has been the main national body within Palestine for mobilizing and organizing collective efforts against the apartheid wall for all of these intervening years. The wall, why focus on the wall? Well, it's an integral part of Zionism's colonial project to expel the Palestinian people from their land. It's a supremacist government that has installed this wall, and it has created an apartheid regime in Palestine. Its call, the Stop the Wall campaign's call, is very clear. It's a four-part call. Cessation of the construction of the wall, dismantling parts of the wall that have already been built, the return of the lands confiscated by the wall itself, and then also compensation for damages and losses due to the construction of the wall. This, in fact, has been supported through rulings in favor of Palestinian cause on this, but nonetheless, the wall persists. And I believe also then the reason why we're focusing on tech in particular is while the wall is, the built environment, its infrastructure, the digital walls now, which is not as true as it was in 2002, but it's certainly very obvious now. Digital walls are being erected in parallel as an extension of the apartheid state and of Zionist Israel. So digital walls sort of feeds into this idea, or the Stop the Wall's vision for a world without walls, pushing back against the ways that Israeli apartheid, colonialism, occupation are also now comprised of vast amounts of digital infrastructure. And furthermore, this is not just Israeli infrastructure, this is big tech, global multinationals that are also complicit in building these digital walls. And this is precisely the subject that Matt is here to talk to us about. So I won't belabor that anymore, other than to, I think, just quickly drive home that, there is no neutral, and our collective campaigns and clarion calls to action are telling tech ultimately to decide between complicity or justice for Palestine. So with that, I want to hand it over to Matt. We're so happy to have you, Matt. Really, thank you so much for taking the time. You're an awesome expert on this, and you have 15 to 20 minutes or however long it takes for you to get through your material. And again, I encourage folks to put their questions in the Q&A. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Mallory, for having me and Stop the Wall. I really appreciate being here, and it's great to be with you all. My name is Matt Mahmoudi. I'm an academic. I'm an affiliated lecturer at the Department of Sociology at the University of Cambridge. I'm also a researcher and advisor on artificial intelligence and human rights at Amnesty's Technology and Human Rights Project. And largely speaking, I'd say I'm a critical race and digital studies scholar who is interested in and working on sort of unpacking the ways in which technology and technological manifestations of racial capitalism, of settler colonialism, impart violence on some of the most marginalized groups around the world, and the ways in which they foster and create a sort of an industry and an industrial complex that allows for this marginalization to happen, to the effect of generating profit, to the effect of circulating capital, and enabling sort of existing structures of global apartheid to persist. In the context of today, I'm going to be drawing on some of my work for Amnesty, as well as some of my independent research, to try and grapple with some of the sort of tech entanglements, what we might consider, as is the topic of today's conversation, high-tech power genocide in Gaza. I'm reflecting on, in particular, the technologies that are used in apartheid at large as part and parcel of apartheid, and going to be drawing on some of what we know about the companies involved, as well as what we might be able to draw from that, and from the realities that are experienced by Palestinians in Palestine, subjected to apartheid, and the sort of tech manifestations of that as well. So let's get started. On November 17th, 2023, reports of Palestinians being held en masse between two large structures on Salah al-Din Road in Gaza started to surface. Over a month after the Israeli occupation forces' bloody siege on Gaza, it had allegedly opened a corridor to the south, albeit governed by reported facial recognition technologies. No airstrike, which, as we know to date, has contributed to over 30,000 civilian deaths, seemed imminent enough to foreclose the mass biometric conscription of one of the world's already most heavily surveilled communities. So Palestinians were narrowly escaping death, only to face the surveillance gaze of the regime, which, even in its purported evacuation efforts after destroying the last vestiges of the homes and neighborhoods of a community of refugees, insisted on extracting their likeness in exchange for safety. Elsewhere, at checkpoints in the West Bank, a new facial recognition program called Red Wolf scans Palestinians' faces and adds them to vast databases, which are used to intensify surveillance and the draconian closure regime that the State of Israel imposes on Palestinians in Hebron. The system is described as an innovation of the Blue Wolf system, which you may have heard of, which is a mobile application that Israeli soldiers have previously referred to as the Facebook for Palestinians, and the Palestinian Surveillance Registry, otherwise known as Wolfpack. With Red Wolf, Israeli authorities have taken the worst possible dystopian fantasies, the sort of idea of an automated system that controls and dominates Palestinians, and made a reality of it. Now, residents in places like Tel Rumeda in the H2 area of Hebron have to contend with facial recognition systems recognizing them in order to pass checkpoint 56, which is a checkpoint that is required to pass in order to access everything ranging from medical services and education to work and access to grocery amenities. So Red Wolf is just the latest in a slew of AI-driven surveillance tools that have been experimented with on Palestinians under the auspices of a so-called Smart City initiative, obfuscating what is at its core an automation of apartheid. Between anomaly detection systems, gait recognition systems, predictive analytics, and facial recognition, Israel's oppression of Palestinians is undergirded by a rampant technosecurity industry with a presence and impact far beyond the region. So the infrastructure of violence, tried and tested in this context as well, and their logics constitute the sort of modus operandi of how much of the sort of smart city and safe city interventions elsewhere as well operate today, under a sort of a veneer of greater convenience and safety, but to profoundly devastating effect. But let's touch base a little bit more on the sort of the domain of what we know about how AI has been used across the West Bank, and also for as an aspect of apartheid. So what we've been looking at in particular at Amnesty has been the ways in which facial recognition has been used to reinforce arbitrary restrictions on the right to freedom of movement, which of course is in violation of international law. Barring Palestinians in Hebron from being able to access their basic rights affects their ability to work, to access education, medical care, maternal care, family life. It makes it very difficult to do anything. And if facial recognition is a part of solidifying that system by militarizing, securitizing, and digitizing the ways in which the checkpoints become increasingly permanent, effectively serves the opposite effect of what an occupation is supposed to be, right? An occupation is supposed to be temporary, and in this case, what we're seeing is an increasing permanence of that occupation creeping into de facto annexation. Hebron, of course, has been described as a smart city. The reality is streets full of surveillance cameras, which are mounted on the sides of buildings, lampposts, surveillance towers, and rooftops, compounding the already drastic segregation that exists in Hebron. For Palestinians, omnipresent surveillance has exacerbated the sense that some areas of H2 are off limits for them, even areas which are just meters away from their homes. One local resident described, for example, how the installation of a checkpoint on a once thriving street in the neighborhood, combined with a heavy military presence and nearly 30 years of movement restrictions and forced closures of Palestinian businesses, had killed all forms of social life. He also told us that Israeli soldiers can tell you that your name is not in the database, as simple as that, and then you're not allowed to pass through to your house. So you could be allowed out of your home and your neighborhood on the one moment earlier in the day and not be allowed back in. Another resident has described the chilling effect that surveillance has in terms of deterring Palestinians from protesting, quoting, those who demonstrate know that even if they don't get detained on the spot, their face will be captured by the cameras and they can be arrested later. So in the greater context of the international crime of apartheid, such tools basically automate aspects of a system of oppression, solidifying rather than dismantling and rendering temporary the cruel conditions under which Palestinians live in the occupied territories. Now, thinking about that, it may be worth reflecting a little bit about who is enabling and the sort of what behind the technologies that we're seeing used in Palestine. So biometric mass surveillance product range from manufacturers such as the Dutch company TKH Group to China-based Hikvision. They're all a part of this mosaic of violence used by Israeli authorities and illegal settlers in the supply chain of AI-driven surveillance systems and smart city projects, from Red Wolf, as well as right down to Mabat 2000, which is the facial recognition system and mass surveillance system that is used in occupied East Jerusalem. So these systems enable Israeli authorities to scale up and automate apartheid policies such that Jewish Israeli settlers may live in illegal settlements within Arab communities in East Jerusalem, like Silwan, under the gaze of Israeli police. In East Jerusalem, we've seen how these systems have been expanding in tandem with settlement activity. So Mabat 2000, for example, has been in place since the turn of the millennium, but it's been supporting facial recognition since it was upgraded in 2017 to 2018, following the release of additional funds by the East Jerusalem district of the Israeli police. And this is a networked system of CCTV, by the way. It connects the old city to a command and control center, which subjects Palestinians to surveillance by Israeli authorities at all times. Among other organizations, Amnesty has sort of been trying to make sense of how extensive these developments have been. And since the 2021 Sheikh Jarrah evictions, we've seen an increase in the number of cameras present in the area, with 1 to 2 cameras found per 5 meters walked in a street survey of about 10 kilometers squared. We also saw how illegal settlement activity begets surveillance, right? Surveillance begets illegal settlement activity in the sense of the biblical excavation projects that you may be aware of in Silwan, which have led to the destruction of Palestinian homes, which in turn has gone hand in hand with the expansion of surveillance infrastructure. As Palestinians resist the destruction of their homes, they see cameras inserted almost in a sort of a double panopticon. You have the middle cameras from the Israeli security forces pointing outwards, looking at Palestinian homes, and you have cameras from surrounding illegal Israeli settlers looking back in towards the Palestinian homes that remain. And this is part and parcel of a coercive environment that's intended to force Palestinians out of areas of strategic interest to Israeli authorities and illegal settlers. And tech companies are core to how this happens, right? They provide not just the eyes and ears of Israeli authorities, as we've looked at here. Silicon Valley giants such as Amazon and Google are also part and parcel of normalizing the trade in these violent technologies. So both companies are engaged in developing a military and policing cloud service project that you may have heard of as well, known as Project Nimbus, for the Israeli military, which has been valued at $1.2 billion. And in January 2024, Palantir also announced its artificial intelligence platform for defense, which uses large language models and AI for defense and military organization. This comes after the company announced in November 2023 that it had been supplying new products to the state of Israel since the beginning of the siege on Gaza following October 7th. And this is symptomatic, I think, of a larger pattern of investments in the hundreds of millions of dollars in militarization and datafication across so-called Western liberal democracies, in a move that can best be described as automating and normalizing apartheid and the xenophobic conditions that underpin it. You might remember Palantir, for those of you who are uninitiated, as the US company that empowered US Immigration Customs Enforcement with software that enabled some of the most aggressive immigration rates to date, with some 800 migrant workers in Mississippi detained using their tools in broad daylights in the fall of 2019 while their children were in school. And of course, this fits neatly within the state of Israel's own positioning of itself as a startup nation. And I think that's worth paying some attention to. So there's a lot of celebratory narratives of Israel as a startup nation, not only effectively heralding dangerous Israeli AI and surveillance exports as cutting edge and crucial in the global quest to reinforce policing, in what Jeff Halper has also referred to as the global pacification project, but they also in turn sanitize the Palestinian lives and livelihoods that are destroyed in order to achieve this level of seamless and smart policing. This is, for example, thoughts that Marwa Fatafta also reflects on in her recent chapter in Resisting Borders and Violent Technologies, and Anthony Lowenstein also in the Palestine Laboratory. And in return, this sort of allows the export of technologies tested on the back of Palestinians back to other contexts for use against marginalized communities, replicating Palestine at scale effectively. On the US southern border, this is a material reality. Dozens of surveillance towers set up by Israeli surveillance companies like Elbit System are being used by US Customs and Border Protection to improve border security and force protection with the help of artificial intelligence and automation. And in the policing sector, you see Usto, the controversial AI-driven surveillance company formerly known as Innovision, promising cost-effective facial recognition technologies with real-time watch listing capabilities for law enforcement agencies. This is the same company that used to provide facial recognition services at the Gaza crossings. But since Microsoft divested from its 40% stake in Usto, then Anyvision, following revelation that its technology was being used for border checks in the occupied territories, the company has increased its presence in the United States. So we see how these technologies get developed, brought in together with other component technologies in the context of Palestine, folded together, tested on the back of Palestinians, and exported. And I have to wonder how long it'll be before, you know, it's fully revealed these sort of companies that have been involved specifically in the targeting efforts. We've all heard about the gospel, of course, as well as the broader security efforts surrounding the situation in Gaza. But of course, one thing that we have to pay attention to and have to reinforce in this context is, and this is not to sort of serve as a bit of a cop-out to this question, but I do think it's important to pay attention to what we have on our hands as far as the international law is concerned. And certainly following the ICJ ruling, I think there's never been a more important moment to point out that the technology companies that are involved in supplying the kind of AI supply chain that could be worked into aspects of genocide, into aspects of apartheid, effectively are unnoticed from this moment and onwards, right? Any sort of activity that would render them as somehow involved or implicated in the exercise of gross human rights violations would potentially subject them to also scrutiny under the provisions of aiding and abetting when it comes to an assessment of various parties' involvements in the genocide, right? And given that the ICJ has recognized this particular moment and these acts of the Israeli state as plausibly genocidal, and given that we're far beyond the usage of the UN guiding principles of business and human rights, which already, prescribe to companies that they must make sure that their products in all stages of their life cycle aren't embroiled in human rights violations. We're far beyond this. And so we're dealing in a scenario in which effectively through continuing activity in the current context in which this determination or these provisional measures have been made by the ICJ, these companies are risking being implicated and in turn being held as aiding and abetting in this particular context. Now, that is a real risk that they have to consider. And what we see time and time again from of course, workers and organizers across the board is that they keep emphasizing and reminding their companies that indeed they are involved in situations that will come back to bite them in the end. And I do think continuing to do that is also a way of having a public record of the fact that these companies were put on notice, not just by individuals from human rights organizations, civil society organizations at large that are actively calling into questions practices during this situation, but also by their own workers. And so continuing to do this, I think, will be completely paramount towards moving into a dismantlement of what we're observing. AI is part and parcel of how apartheid is exacted on Palestinians, as I said in the beginning. But by peeling away and stopping the technology, we are effectively eliminating a layer of apartheid. And of course, it's not going to itself stop, as it were, both the physical wall and the sort of symbolic and digital manifestations of it. But it is going to help us peel away one layer that is enabling this system to continue, a system that has effectively crept into the conditions that we're now observing in Gaza. I'm going to stop there because I realize I'm speaking over time, but very open to questions and look forward to engaging with you all.